Welcome to Raising the Curve, a podcast designed to teach you everything you need to know to be better with your money. In the wise words of Amy Schumer, we're slipping carrots into the brownie recipe.
I don't really get the saying.
It's kind of like eating vegetables that actually taste good. You know, like putting
Still
carrot
not
in the
with
brownie
you.
recipe.
Are you on the script?
It's basically like saying investing in finance can be boring as but it totally doesn't need to be.
Okay. So we're making it fun by putting the carrot, aka the vegetables, which are good for you, into the brownie recipe.
Okay, we got there, okay.
Okay.
Wow, you've really got a finance brain.
Yeah, one of us has to.
This is true. Okay, come and learn alongside me from Vic Harris, ex-fund manager, where I'm going to ask all the questions that you wish you could.
And I'm going to be eating all the brownie you wish you could.
No, that's so not the joke, Vic.
Oh.
Okay, just come and talk and learn and laugh with us because together we really can raise the curve. Kristen and Nat are two enormous Curve supporters, aren't they?
Yes.
I mean, when we first started the Curve, they reached out to us and were like, love what you're doing, girls. Let us know if you need any help. And we were like, please, can you help us with everything?
Yeah. And we've had some great catch-ups with them whenever they're in town. When we were living in Auckland, they were in Wellington. Whenever they'd come up, we'd always grab margaritas and just talk shit to the point. It's like, oh gosh, we've got to go. We've got
Actually,
another
and
meeting.
I always seem to get like food and no one else really did.
Yeah.
You know, like all the times we've met them, I've been like, I'll get a pizza for one. And I'm like, anyone else eating? Everyone's like, nope. I'm like, cool.
Okay, I'll just eat the whole thing. So they started a new company called Powrsuit, which is all about bringing more women into more leadership roles.
Yeah, which
and
is
C-suite roles.
It's such a, C-suite roles was even something I didn't even know what that meant when we first started the Curve. But it essentially means at the table in massive companies making big decisions.
Yeah. So you know C-suite is like CEO, CFO, COO.
No.
C-suite. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
thanks.
That makes sense now. Yeah.
Love it. But we spoke to
So
them
it's going to be like, we need a C-suite. We need a C-suite person who is...
I'll be totally overusing that for sure. But this podcast, I think what we wanted to talk to them about, so they started Hatch, which is a New Zealand trading platform. Similar to Sharesies, you go on, you put money in your digital wallet and you can buy fractional shares.
Yeah.
So they've started their own, they've done a startup, they've worked in the finance space and now they are empowering women to get into leadership roles, which is amazing. And on their podcast, they talk about all kinds of things from like confidence to pay rises to this to that. Like it's really broad.
It's incredible, yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to listen, you totally can find them on Spotify or Apple. But we also spoke to, like Nat particularly has invested since she was really young, which I loved hearing about. I think, just hearing how people get into it and how early they invested and then what their journey's been since then always really fascinates me because I was so late to the game.
Yeah. And they're quite a dynamic duo. They're very different, just like you and I.
Yeah.
And it's always a fun time talking
Who
to them.
I reckon you're more like Kristen and I'm probably more like Nat.
Yeah.
I would say they're both super creative and super outgoing,
Yeah.
but they definitely lean into different
It's just
parts
like with two founders, they have different skill sets and you can tell. And I think you'd be able to tell with us as well.
Yeah.
But it's
Literally in our video when we're like pitching to investors, it's like one person doesn't even know how to log in.
Yeah.
It's like, yep, that's me.
That's me. Anyway, it was a great chat. And having 4 people on the podcast was quite...
It was a bit overwhelming, wasn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, it's hard to not talk over each other.
With 2 of us.
Let alone 4.
Yeah, with 2 of us. Yeah. Don't talk about me. Shush.
And we'll take this offline.
Welcome, Kristen and Nat.
We were just saying off mic, it really feels like you guys have already been on the podcast.
I know.
You haven't, but we've just had so many like fun little drink dates.
Margaritas.
We have. We've switched to Vodi tequilas and Vodi soddies now. We've really advanced.
Body soddies.
Oh, I love that.
Sounds so Aussie. A body
Tequila soddies. It
Tequila
doesn't really
sod.
work.
Soddy tequila. No.
Last time we caught up with Kristen and Nat, we had a podcast recording after and we had one soddy tequila before and we were on form and I thought, shit, maybe we need to be drinking for all of our podcasts.
I turned around and Soph's just put my sunglasses on, sitting in the podcast studio with sunglasses. I was like, oh, you're really paying attention. I'm glad I prepped for this podcast. It was quite fun.
They're
You
really
were
cool
on form
sunglasses.
because we had a podcast afterwards and I was not on form, but that's because I had a beer, not a Vodi soddy.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Did you have
Yeah.
2 beers actually, Kristen? Was it actually 2 beers?
What is that?
was like,
Tequila a
bad
day
idea.
keeps the
The doctor?
Dentist away.
Mosquitoes away?
Yeah. keeps the podcast alive. There you go. Just created my own quote. So Soph and I get asked this all the time, and I love how we like throw to each other like, oh, no, you can answer this one like we're a couple or something. You know, it's like, how did you get engaged? How did you meet? And you just throw to...
How did you get one name?
Yeah. And you kind of look at each other really cute, and it's like, you answer this one. No, you answer.
You hang up.
So we want to ask you, how did you two first meet?
Well, Kristen proposed to me. Do you want to recount our proposal story? It was on the Eiffel Tower.
You recount it.
I remember the first day I met Kristen. She was running an innovation hub for a wealth company, and I had gone through I've never had a job interview before, but I thought it sounded really interesting what they were doing. And so I'd worked my way through at least 4 different interviews for something that I was like, I don't even know what this thing is. I don't even know what I'm doing, until I finally landed with, you need to meet Kristen. And so she turned up 20 minutes late in a flap, and I was like, this woman is my soulmate. And I don't know if we even talked about anything we needed to talk about, but we had a drink, we had a great chat, which is apparently my style of job interviews, and we started together in this innovation hub, and very quickly, you know, threw a bunch of ideas out, got the organization up and running on a few projects, and then, because we're us, pitched back to them, hey, we actually want to start this fintech with your support and partnership. You want to give us a bunch of money and let us do it?
No way. Is that how Hatch started?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
So for people who aren't based in New Zealand, Hatch is one of the leading trading platforms in New Zealand in terms of buying partial shares, buying fractional shares, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, you can buy 10% of a Microsoft share if you want on Hatch. And that was your baby. Well, your big baby, your massive baby.
Who actually gave birth to it? Was it a joint effort?
It was absolutely a joint effort, and we had 2 other co-founders as well, blokes who were a divine, an ops guy and a tech guy. But Nat and I were effectively, I mean, we ran the show, didn't we, Nat? I was going to say, this is sounding like a very Frankenstein baby. It was a lot more beautiful than that, with its 4 parents and multiple birthing vessels.
Very well looked after baby. Yeah. And how did the idea come about? So you were in this incubator hub, and then were you like, what are some problems that people are needing solved? Like, how did that conversation come about?
Well, we knew we wanted to do something in the wealth space, obviously, being inside of a wider wealth/bank at the time. And so we just thought, what do Kiwis feel about wealth in general? Like, what does that even mean to them? How is it that they want to live? What are their goals? How are they, I suppose, saving and investing? And what is it that they even define to be wealthy as? And it turns out most of the time it's actually just choice. It's about balance. It's about freedom. It's about having enough to do the things that I love and to have choice, and not necessarily a private jet, although that wouldn't be bad, except for the climate. But anyway, I just had to put that in there.
I was about to be it's not good for the planet.
Sorry. I knew that. I'm not going to have one. It's all good. But yeah, so we went out and did hundreds of hours of research. We talked to everyday Kiwi and just got a real sense of what it meant to them, their futures, and how was it that they were working towards those futures, their dreams, and how could we support them in that? How could we demystify this concept of investing in things that they love, which effectively, you named Microsoft at the top, but if we could take something that was really hard and complex and foreign and not part of their worlds, like investing and stock market and New York Stock Exchange, all these really scary terms, and just say it effectively is backing the companies that you know and love. If we could kind of bridge that gap, that is how we could support them to effectively reach their goals. And so we did lots and lots of research. We got really clear on the problem that we were solving, which was to give access to these incredible companies and brands to help them on their way. And then, effectively just we're really clear on kind of, I suppose, the problem to be solved and who we were targeting.
I think personally for us, it's helped our business in the sense that if we're educating women about investing, being like, anyone can do it, everyone can do it, and there actually wasn't platforms like Hatch out there where you could invest $5 or $10 or $20, then it's kind of would be talking, information would be falling on deaf ears. So anyone can do it. Oh, but you need 100 grand.
Did you guys invest before you started Hatch? Like, what do your portfolios look like? What's your approach to investing? Are you still investing now?
I have been a massive investor for a very long time. I probably started in my early 20s when there wasn't that access. So I started with smart shares and really got interested in that and started putting money aside every week. And then I grew and grew and grew various different things and have always been a real set and forget, take every amount of money that comes in and immediately send a bunch of it to investments and then forget they even exist. And what's been really cool about that, and actually probably at the start of Hatch, it was the coolest part for me, was I had already had sort of 10, 15 years of growth. And so when you're talking to new people about new investors and they have this sense of, every day it goes up and down and it feels so scary, I'd actually experienced that feeling, but also what happens over time where those ups and downs proportionately become very small, and it actually takes a lot longer or a much bigger drop for your portfolio to drop into the red over that time frame because you've just had that compounding growth for years and years and years. So I'm a huge fan. And one of the greatest joys of being part of Hatch is that I'd spent years very clumsily trying to convince all my friends to invest because I could see its power, and suddenly having a platform and the ability to kind of figure out that all the things I'd been saying weren't working because, you can't force people to do something that they're terrified of or that they don't think is for them. And there's actually a whole bunch of behavior change elements that need to go into it.
And I was the complete opposite. I had a Kiwi saver. I was in the wrong fund. And I also had a fund through a financial advisor, which I engaged with. And I think my first job when I've got on the career ladder, it was I knew I had to invest. And so someone hooked me up with a financial advisor. And for over 15 years, I was paying far too much, not even understanding what was going on. He did some risk profile on me and I was like, he asked me, do you want to lose your money? And I'm like, no.
Oh my God.
So he put me in a low risk profile, everything that you could think of a disservice to me as a woman who just needed it to be broken down and to be supported through my decision making with common sense. What went wrong? So really Hatch, by the time I got to Hatch, I changed it all up, took back control, and the rest is history.
Who is he and what's his number? Does he
Stop.
work?
It's like I can see her face across the desk. I'm like, move on.
It's like,
What do they say?
so
97% of women change financial providers if their partner dies because they're just not being served at all. So it's a huge percentage.
Wow.
Nat, what did you invest in years ago when you were in your early 20s, and what are you investing in now? Like, is it stock picking? Do you invest in ETFs, funds? What's your approach?
Right, Vic, I need your advice on this. I started out in funds, and I am a huge fan of Warren Buffett's philosophy of keep it as simple as possible. So I'm very much a S&P 500. I've got a European fund and a couple of very small New Zealand funds because I have learnt over the years we are a tiny market. But what I have done, and I'm a 80-20 rule, I try and put the bulk of that into set and forget. And then every now and again, I really back a company. And my first company I really backed was Xero. And I participated in the IPO and convinced a bunch of my family to. My mum and dad have an epic retirement as a result of my terrible financial advice. Now illegal.
Oh my God, I love that.
But what I did was sell my shares along the way. So I bought shares in Xero for $1. And I sold them for $10, and I sold them for $15, and I sold them for $45, and now they're worth...
Just for context, Xero shares are worth 113 Australian dollars per share.
Yeah, and that's probably not even at their peak. So then when we started Hatch, I thought, I am going to change my behavior because if you really back a company, you should buy shares and hold on to those shares for a very, very long time. And I'd heard about Amazon and Google and all those companies where if you just bought them in the 80s and held on, you'd be a multi-millionaire. So I invested in Tesla, and this was my biggest individual share to date. I invested $10,000 in Tesla, which is now worth $200,000. And
Jesus.
a decent portion of my portfolio. So I'm now having panic attacks going,
Diversify.
But I was like, but I committed to myself to hold. And then I look at Elon Musk and I'm like, ugh. So I've done that. And then the other, if we want to go into mistakes, big mistake I've made is I've just been doing a whole bunch of, because, over the years you do a bit of this and a bit of this when something interesting comes along. I'm terrible like that. And I'd realized I had a bunch of money sitting in dividend funds, which is great as an alternative to savings. But when you're in a growth phase of your life, like I had spent years missing out on a lot of money from them because they'd just been paying me, 4-5% dividends a year and not doing anything else really.
Interesting.
I can't believe how amazing your investing career's been. Sorry, is that a bit lame? But seriously, you've invested, I feel like, really well.
Yeah.
Made some amazing decisions, like to invest in Tesla that early and Zero. So cool. How did you even know about them as companies? Did you research them? How did they cross your path? And you were like, oh, I'll invest in that.
I reckon this is, again, part of the philosophy of Hatch, is finance was meant to be or seen as this really crazy, hardcore dude bros wearing suits, selling buy, sell. And I was like, I'm not that person. I'm never going to be that person. I think of investing like anything else. If I buy a house that I'd love to live in. If I buy shares in a company, I buy shares in a company that I think has an incredible strategy. And I play to my superpowers, my unfair advantage. So I was working in tech. I understood software as a service before I think a lot of New Zealand did. So I could see how Xero's model would grow and grow and grow. And same with Tesla. I watched a bunch of videos and just saw their vision and saw that it wasn't a car company. It wasn't a tech company. It will effectively change the world if they pull it off. And I just really, really backed them. But I don't do that very often because that is, it's very rare to come across a company like that at that stage that you go, ooh, I think I see something that maybe other people don't see or en masse don't see as much yet.
Did your parents talk to you both about investing, or how did you get interested in it?
Not for me. No, they didn't. And it was definitely budgeting. I could see my mum really stretching a dollar growing up in a single mum household. And so I understood the concept of needing to stretch a dollar, but I didn't really have a growth mindset around that I deserved or could be wealthy or what that even meant to me. Like, it was just always like this paycheck to paycheck and could do some things and couldn't do other opportunities. And so it wasn't really until I got around colleagues in the workforce where others really were able to demystify this concept of investing. And so that's, for me, very... it was new. I felt out of my comfort zone, which is why I felt like I got scammed a little bit with that financial advisor. So I just
such a shitty feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it's gross.
And I really think it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. Yeah. Like, it's hard enough to step into the space of, okay, I'm going to ask questions and maybe like look at doing things a bit differently. Then to have an experience like that, it would be enough to put a lot of people off for a long time.
It's the same even with investing. If you don't do it correctly, and you invest in something that is too high risk, or you lose a lot of money, or you invest at a bad time, or you invest too much, or whatever it is, and you get put off, it really knocks your confidence, and then you just don't invest ever again. It's like people that invested before the global financial crisis or before the .com bubble burst, and they've just got they lost a lot of money, which have been very stressful. But it's kind of... It's harder than it seems, but it's taking that and being like having a fresh set of eyes on it and being like, okay, I'm going to start new. It's a new day. It's like just having that more. I do deserve better. I do deserve more.
Well, I even think that with all the times that I accepted too less as a salary as a woman throughout my entire career, I was always like, oh, I'll do this for the learning, and I didn't know. No one ever taught me.
Oh my God, same. I worked for free for like 4 months or something. When the Christchurch earthquake happened, I left broadcasting school, and I remember being like so keen to work in radio that I went and did, honestly, like nearly 4 months of fully free work. And I think about whoever was the boss at the time, and I'm like, it's quite shit actually to take advantage of someone that much.
Yeah, I know.
But I do think actually, Kristen, that like scarcity mindset or not necessarily being introduced to the idea of growing your money from an early age puts you in a place of, I might never get better. I've got a great opportunity, so I should take what I can get. Like, I grew up with really similar values of stretching a dollar. Like, even yesterday when I went to fill up my car, my dad was like, oh, well, don't go to the BP down the road. Make sure you go on gas or something or other to check where the cheapest fuel is. And I was like,
I feel like that's just every parent though, like looking for a deal. Yeah.
Gatsby, that was
I'll
it.
tell you do exactly the same thing.
I just think there's it's a fine balance between stretching a dollar and growing a dollar and figuring out where the most effort should be put. Because if you're only focusing on the stretching, there's only so far you can make it go.
And I also think on the flip side as well, if you're not focusing on the frugalness or, making the most of a dollar or stretching it, it can kind of have the opposite effect. So yeah, you do need a good balance. I feel like we're a good balance. And you guys seem like a good balance too, in terms of the whole growth mindset, that kind of thing. And then it's like, actually, what's the best use of it?
Well, even when it comes to business, like our expenses, we were talking about how much we're spending a month on our contractors and things like that. And my immediate thought was, let's go through our expenses and I'll see what we can cut down. And Vic's like, no. Let's see where we can make more money. And I was like, gosh, it's so interesting how the way that you have always thought about money is your default. And I think what you've done with Hatch and even just these kinds of conversations and Nat, you sharing your experience growing money, it opens people's perspectives up to, if they're in a situation, do I want to spend my energy cutting back on family groceries, or do I want to look at how I can put aside $5 or $10 a week towards, the S&P 500 and grow that? It's just, I think you're right. It's a combination of both. You don't want to be frivolously spending money like it's going out of fashion, but at the same time, you don't want to be just being frivolous and then not also investing.
Do you think, like the way I see money, and I think it's probably how I was raised, is not growth or conserving, because my parents did both. It was actually just having no emotional connection to money, just seeing it as a tool. And when you see it as a tool and you don't identify with it in any way, you go, okay, so the problem is I don't have enough money right now, or our cost to revenue are out of whack. Which side of the tool do I use? And you just start to think about it quite differently rather than conserving or growing. You're just like, right now, for example, when we left Hatch, I have a really strong philosophy of I don't like to go backwards financially. So I was like, right now, and I knew we wanted to start a new business. So I was like, it's going to take a while before I can start growing money again. My tool for the moment is to cut spending. And then now we're in sort of a slightly different stage. So it just sort of changes the conversation from one or the other to use both when it makes sense.
I reckon I need to instill that a bit.
In me?
No, in my life. Like just having a bit of an emotional detachment to money. Yeah. Because I feel like it kind of consumes me a bit too much.
Yeah, like we were talking about our kids today and Vic got tears in her eyes. And I thought, shit. But it is. There's so much like emotion wrapped up in money and spending money. Even like...
And I just also find having a business about money.
I know.
I'm managing the business finances, my finance. I'm just like, wake up and it's like money, go to bed.
And then you go out on a Saturday
dream
night
about flying
and
cash
you
notes.
run into people who are like at a gig and they're like, oh, the curve. And you're like, had a couple of mushrooms and you're like, the last thing I want to think about right now is fucking investing.
Is this your coping mechanism?
No, I'm actually joking. It is fun like talking about it with people who obviously listen to the podcast, but it can be really all consuming. And I think separating the emotion from what needs to be done, I find super difficult as well. I don't know if you've got any tips, Nat, on how you've managed to do that or like distance yourself from saving, spending, investing.
I was just going to say never start a business with Kristen then, because when we go to parties together, she starts for the first couple of hours. She's like flitting everywhere, talking about Powrsuit and creating all these amazing connections. Then a couple of hours later in the night when I've had quite a few drinks, they're like, oh my goodness, you're Nat, you're Kristen's partner. Let's talk about Powrsuit. And I'm like, no.
You're like, no, I've had too many margaritas.
It's great. I think the only thing I can point to, and we've obviously thought about this a lot over Hatch and post-Hatch and because we both think having money conversations is really important and normalizing talking about it. The only thing I can point to, because just to be clear, my parents weren't wealthy. My dad was in the military. My mum didn't work because they were traveling around so much. We did not grow up in a high income family. But the only thing I can think about is my parents never created a sense of scarcity. So an example of that would be I never went to school holiday programs. I was never able to have all the cool stuff that, what are they called? Chatterings and all of that stuff.
Chatterings.
I desperately wanted chatterings. But my mum never said we couldn't afford it. I never once remember in my life hearing the words we can't afford it. She would always have another way of portraying it that didn't assign scarcity. So it would be, well, if we want to do that, how are we going to save for it? Or why do you want cheddar rings? They're probably going to go out of fashion in 2 weeks. Let me know in 2 weeks if you want them. And really just made me think, like, the idea of money being a scarce thing just never really occurred to me. But the way to think about money and how to use it to get what you want and to prioritize the things you want and not waste it on things you didn't want was sort of what was instilled in me. So that's the only thing I can point to, is that my parents just never really talked about it as a thing that we didn't always have.
If they did, though, for me coming out the other end, I think what I've learned, and Vic, I can really relate to that money like stressor, I think, because I still do get that. But I think I always go, today is a fresh new day and I can start anything today, like recognizing kind of this clean slate, and today is a fresh start and I can grow from here. But it's also, I think, I back Nat and I to build assets of value. Like, we were able to build Hatch into this incredible asset that was really valuable ultimately in the end, and I back us to do it again. So they're looking forward and recognizing your superpowers and actually increasing the value ultimately of your income or future income is possible. Anything's possible.
I also feel for parents these days, like, gosh, you're like, oh, I don't want to give my kids too much because then they'll think that everything comes for free. Oh, but I don't want to give them too little because then they'll have a frugal mindset. I would just, gosh, I don't want to do it anytime
Like this
soon.
morning, about an hour ago, goes, I'm not going to be able to have kids. I don't have time. I can't.
And I was just complaining yesterday, their mind are so spoiled. It's like, even if they're not spoiled with financial means, they're spoiled with convenience. Like, kids, there's no friction in their lives anymore, going from A to B or getting drop-offs or whatever. Lunch is made, dinner is made. I mean, it's like they're spoiled with convenience. Anyway, I digress. I'm good child support.
You guys have a podcast where you are encouraging women to step up to a place of leadership, learn more about how we can step into positions of power in business, in our personal lives. And you talk about all different types of things on the podcast. And when we were trying to figure out what we wanted to talk to you about, of course, the investing lens was really important, but there was also so many interesting conversations that you've had. And we wondered if we could do a bit of a speed round type thing where we could bring up a couple of the podcasts we've seen and listened to and really liked, and just throw to one of you to give some key points on it. And for anyone that does want to go and listen to more of those podcasts and find out, you know, in more depth about some of these conversations, they can do that.
Let's do it.
Would you be open to that?
Yep.
Okay.
And shout out to Sophie for helping us with our podcast, by the way.
Remember our little ear checks? All
Yep.
right, guys, you talk too much in that episode.
Yeah, it was great. We were like,
Love
we
that.
were braced for impact, and you were so lovely.
Oh, gosh. So what do you think are the biggest barriers or common things that women struggle with when it comes to stepping into leadership roles? Let's throw to you, Kristen.
Well, there is a common belief that the glass ceiling is actually the biggest barrier, but did you know that it's actually the first rung on the ladder? For every 10 men that get their first promotion into a managerial role, only 7 women get that. And that's on the very first career ladder. So the biggest barriers are that right from the get-go, we are not given clear, supportive pathways to promotion up the ladder. I mean, I could talk about so many workplace biases and microaggressions and things that go unseen or that are simply accepted. But I think if we just look to every step along the ladder, ultimately, we only have the biggest companies. We only have, of those, 10% are run by women. And so you might go, oh, gosh, it's really hard to get that top job. But it starts right at that first rung.
Do you think there's also an element of businesses being afraid of women having babies and what that's going to mean financially, and therefore it's just actually way easier to keep them in lower positions that you can fill quicker without, I guess, as many skills as you might need in a CEO role?
Or not hire them at all?
Yeah, there could be. I mean, we've heard some pretty horrific stories on that front, which is always disappointing still in 2023, 2024. It's like, no, this isn't happening. No, that didn't happen to you. I'm sure there's a number of threads to unpick there, and absolutely stepping out of the career workforce and even stepping back into it is a massively challenging thing to do. And I know I experienced that myself having kids too. I had to step out twice, and then coming back in, my confidence was hit. I didn't back myself to take on a big job at the time, or I really struggled to get there because I had this gap in my career. And so, yeah, I think there's a number of threads to unpick there. And I can't speak for any organizations or people who feel, are doing anything on purpose. But yeah, this stuff happens still.
I remember I had a friend and she took off her wedding ring. She was going for a job interview and she took off her wedding ring because she didn't want them to think, oh, well, you've got married, so you're going to be having babies soon.
Just go on and pretend that you can't get a date and that you're not going to be having kids for like 15 years.
Just go around being like, I'm single. Secretly.
Any hot guys in the office? Do you?
Someone's like, I saw you get married on Instagram just a few weeks ago. You'd be like, no, God.
Didn't you have an interview with a bank once and they asked you a personal question and
It's so funny because he was actually my boss in my last job.
No.
So he moved and so he became my boss.
Can you tell the story? This is too good.
Bless his heart, he's the most lovely guy. But I went into a big bank for an interview, probably like 5 years ago now. Anyway, and there was two men interviewing me, and then about 20 minutes into the interview, this lady comes in and they were like, sorry, you're not allowed to interview a female without another female present. So I was like, okay, weird. Bank, whatever, big, rules. So she sat there, didn't say anything. And then it was a great interview and I got on with them really well. And at the end,
it's like I was nailing it.
I was planning to go over to the States, and anyway, I'd come back and we were just chatting about life. And then he asked, so are you married? Or something along the lines of like, do you have a partner? Or something, literally just making conversation, because I was like, oh, I'd gone overseas, I'd come back, and he was just kind of being friendly. And she goes, nope, you can't answer that. And she looked at him, she was like, you cannot ask that. And then I got awkward, and then he got awkward. And I was like, oh, is this what it's going to be like working at a bank? It's just like everything's like got, rules and regulations. Anyway, we laugh about it now and we actually work together. He was like, I was genuinely just interested in your life. And I don't know, it was quite funny that
the point of the story is that you're not allowed to ask it because it's basically as if you're trying to figure out how soon you're having kids.
Yeah.
Might you have to take time off work?
But it was funny. I was very late 20s and it didn't even occur to me that's what they were asking. I was sitting there about to be like, oh no, I don't have a boyfriend. But before I even could, they were like, no, do not answer that. But yeah, it's quite good, I guess, to even the playing field that they can't even ask those questions. But with today's world, you can probably pretty easily figure it out. One question I want to ask is, you talk about the 80-20 rule. What is that, and can you explain the concept a bit better? And I've actually been in a conference with Nat and she's explained this so well.
Oh, goodness.
So I'll throw to you.
High pressure. 80-20 rule is basically 80% of the outcome comes from 20% of the effort. So the guy who invented the term, or who sort of labeled the term, looked around a couple of things. One was his garden and realized that 20% of the trees produced 80% of the fruit. And when you start looking into it, I'm sure we've all experienced the same thing. We've applied it to things like teams at work, when you think probably your top 20 performers probably do the 80% of the value in the organization. Kristen's great example, which was very trigger alert for me because I just had to throw out a bunch of clothes that no longer fit, was that we probably wear 20% of our wardrobe 80% of the time. We have probably group chats with funny, silly names with 20% of the people we know, and we spend 80% of our time talking to them. So the concept, if you actually apply it to your work, is really, really powerful, because a lot of us probably identify as perfectionists and overachievers and high achievers. And what that might effectively mean is that we are wasting an awful lot of time doing stuff that doesn't add an awful lot of value. And while I think it's very easy for us to go, oh, it's 80%, it's obviously just sort of a vague idea. It's a really, really powerful tool to challenge yourself to look at where you're adding value and where you might be able to save time to use for something that's actually a little bit more strategically important.
How do you identify that 20% though? I feel like that's
Yeah, no, it's actually...
I think you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
I think there's so many. I mean, it's probably related to different things have different rules, but I have seen so many people who, when you're presenting something to your team, they polish it and tidy, where it's like you actually could just go and deliver the message. Emails, there's the way you present documents, there's when someone does something that's not quite to your standard and then you stay up all night doing the rest of it and actually their standard was probably fine. There's a bunch of those really tangible examples, but that we're obviously very action focused. So one of the things we just say is just have a think when you're doing something. Is this actually adding a lot of value, or am I going to be spending a ton of my time maybe to improve it by 5%?
So is this podcast in the 80 or the 20?
But I reckon you could totally apply that to investments, right? Like probably 20% of them would do really well and 80% can do kind of average, but the 20% carry you through.
Yeah.
Definitely. If you invested in 100 things, 20 would probably do really well and 80 wouldn't.
Yeah, and that's actually what investment bankers, venture capitalists do, right? They invest in a whole bunch of companies and hope that the top small fraction give them all the rewards.
One of the podcasts you've done, you speak a lot about how confidence is weaponized for women. And I would love to understand that concept a little bit more. Like, how is it problematic, and how can we understand it and then not fall into that same narrative?
Yeah, this is something where if someone doesn't put their hand up, a woman for a job, or perhaps is feeling a wee bit shaky, automatically that term not only is thrown around, but the woman has accepted it as a label. So you might get a male leader or an ally that's like, she just needs a little bit more confidence. And we hear it a lot, like, would you just kind of have a chat with her because she just needs to have a bit more confidence. And we hear it over and over and over again. So we kind of accept it. And so it's like, oh, I lack confidence. I'm just not confident enough. And if we were to kind of parse that term, it's actually not really a feeling. And if we dig into what it means, it's like, oh, well, we feel nervous because we're trying something for the very first time, or we feel a little bit scared because we are stretching ourselves and might be standing and speaking in front of a group for the first time. And so there's all these feelings that are entirely appropriate to be feeling at the time, but to slap a label on ourselves like we have some syndrome and it's a weakness and we carry it around with us is not helpful. And then again, it's weaponized because if we portray confidence as a male might in the workplace, traditionally as a leader who is a man, we might be charismatic, we might be assertive, and we might wreak these kind of perceptions of confidence that we've accepted over time. And yet a woman, it'll be like, oh, she's like really aggressive or she's really bossy. And so it's kind of a lose-lose, this concept of confidence. So we just want to ban it outright.
I reckon that's so true. The idea though of, oh, they need to be more confident. And as soon as you are, people are like, they're a bit good for their boots, you know, like, oh, she's a little bit up herself. Like, okay, cool, thanks. Good to know.
It's such a weird, like...
Thanks for the great feedback.
I don't know when confidence became a requirement to do anything anyway. It's almost like we've correlated confidence and competence, and I'd rather hire for competence or have people around me who are really competent. But instead we sort of seem to think confidence is an indicator of something, which it generally isn't.
Someone can be confident and
really incompetent.
Yeah, and like most finance bros, you know, they're like, yeah. No, I understand. Yeah. And it's like, do you? Yeah. You know, do you know you're missing it?
Subtle jab to anyone that's ever worked.
What are some key takeaways from the optimizing your cycle in the workplace? It's another podcast topic.
Well, I think for all of us, there was a sudden realization that our cycle wasn't just our period. And I don't know, you two are younger and more glamorous than us, so you may have thought about this a lot, but I've had...
We are not. People keep saying that. I'm like, I definitely don't feel at all glamorous.
So glamorous.
At all. No, we're not.
I love that we portray that.
No, we really need to like just break through and make sure people
own
are
it. It's a great personal brand. Yeah. I would claim it.
I mean, Soph came to work one day and last night's closed. So
that's so glamorous. You've been out partying all night.
So glamorous.
We're in bed by 9:30.
Honestly, do you know the problem here is that I gave her so much shit when she was dating, like 6 months ago, that now because she's in a
loving
relationship,
it.
I'm getting absolutely thrown under the bus.
I also love that I assumed that you turning up in your clothes is that you're out partying and not staying at someone's house. This is how lame I am.
Well, I'm glad Sophie clarified that.
Thanks for that, Sophie.
But I agree. I think it was only really in the last couple of years that I've started to realize, I've got more energy at this time of the month. Or, if I'm ovulating, I am on fire. If I am in my period, I'd love to just have a day to myself, you know?
Or if I'm randomly crying, I'm like, sorry, period's due tomorrow.
I agree.
I saw a meme the other day and it was like, 35 years on, you have a really shit day, you're feeling super anxious, and then you realize it's your period tomorrow. And you're like, it's so true. It's bizarre how disconnected we are from the idea of your period being a cycle and how you are a completely different human at different times of the month because that is how our bodies work. And it shouldn't be like, what's the word? Like, not demonized, but it's kind of this like, don't talk about periods because it's this like, you're this horrible grouchy person. It's like, no, it's energy levels, it's creativity. It's just like having self-awareness is how you change throughout the month.
I agree. And I feel like the challenge that we face yet again is that the world was designed around male hormones, especially the workplace, which they also have a hormonal cycle. It just repeats every 24 hours and is pretty stable throughout the month. We have that same one, it's the circadian rhythm, great, but we have overlaid with this other monthly cycle. So what that means is we often expect ourselves to perform the same every day, and that's what leads to all sorts of trouble. Whereas if we actually went for 2 weeks out of every month, we are performing at an exceptional rate. We are collaborative, we are creative, we can solve complex problems, we are on fire. But what that means is we also need 2 weeks where we are in restoration mode. And so if we actually thought about our hormones like that we don't have to perform the same every day, and our superpower is actually the ability to ramp up and ramp down, I think we'd have a really totally different, we'd be much kinder to ourselves, and we'd probably perform a lot better and get a lot more stuff done because we didn't try and bang our heads against a wall when we have our periods or when we're in that kind of down week.
I was scheduling a meeting the other day, Sophie, and I was like, I'll just check Soph's calendar and see if she's free.
Oh my God, you saw what was in my calendar?
And then her calendar was Vic's on her period.
Oh, good.
I was like, am I that horrible to work with around my
It's
period?
so obvious when Vic's on her period
good
that I
idea.
started just putting it in my calendar.
But
So
I was like, oh, bless, it's changed. And she'll think I'm on my period then. So it gives me, I don't know. Yeah,
well, if you could help me, that would be really,
You're
you
like
know.
space.
Mine kind of changes it, yeah. But
That's so funny. But I also think maybe you could think about the way you spend with regards to your period, right? Like, so if you're in a cycle, if you're ovulating, you probably want to go out and have fun and go out for dinners and stuff. If you're, I don't know, I think if you're...
yeah, or be compassionate if you accidentally do some online shopping because you're feeling a bit down. It's like, just be a bit more compassionate. Be like, oh, you know what? I can return it once I've had my period.
And if you feel it pretty badly, one of the things is there's one of the great injustices of being a woman is the week before you feel your worst is when you feel your best. So you often, and this is something I'm guilty of, you come up with so many social plans for the next week. You are so giving, you're so generous, and the next week you don't want to see anyone. So just be aware of when you're feeling your best. Probably the next week is not the time to book things for. Save yourself some money because you don't have to go to the events you're going to really regret committing to.
Genius.
That just makes me feel like real down about when I next feel my best. Because then I'll be like, oh, well, I know that the...
No, it just means you have to embrace when you feel your best.
Okay. Everyone, let's party.
Live for the now.
Come back to mine.
And there's other people, they're like, no, come do it next week. Imagine if you're just out of sync the whole time with your best friend. It'd be quite, yeah. One thing I wanted to loop back to was we talked about investing in Tesla, investing in Zero. How do you both identify investing opportunities? Do you have certain things you look for in terms of companies or ETFs or anything that like gets you excited about investing?
Yeah, well, for me, I do very much a set and forget for long-term stuff, Kiwi Saver and a fund. And that's just like your typical boring spread across thousands of companies. And that's the bulk of my money. And then similar to Nat, I actually will look at companies I love and or trends that are really interesting. So the things that I've been looking to, and yes, okay, for me, I will learn through the media or the news or whatever. And so there's just little cues. For example, when COVID was coming on, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. it might be worthwhile to kind of invest in one of the pharmaceutical companies, which I did. Similar to AI, what are some of the big players in that space? NVIDIA, as an example, is something that I looked at. And then the chip, same things with kind of chips. You get all these news reports of like chip shortages and everything. And so I view that my stock portfolio or individual share portfolio as very much opportunistic. I don't put a huge amount of money in it, but I'm definitely trying to be really open and aware of trends. And equally with like women, companies that are run by women, they outperform on a lot of measures. And so I feel equally super confident in investing in organizations run by women.
I had someone message the Curve account today saying, thoughts on AI? I want to invest in AI. Is that something either of you have dabbled in or especially, I guess, if you're both quite in that tech space?
Well, I just happen to have, I've got investment in Microsoft, who obviously is a massive investor in OpenAI. So I feel like that's my play in it. But equally, NVIDIA is getting into that space. And so I feel comfortable. Like with that, I probably won't go any further than that.
What about you, Nat?
Yeah, no, for some reason, AI is just not my jam. And I'm like I see it as a great way to automate and to take some boring tasks off. I just don't find it like I'm interested in it in a business sense, but from an investing sense, I'm not interested in it, in all honesty. But I think that's the joy of investing based on what you care about, is I think I find it so fun to talk to Kristen and talk to other friends, and we all go down these different rabbit holes and we all have different interests, and I love learning about what other people invest in. I just feel like for me, I love Kristen's approach of Microsoft. You've got the benefits of a hugely stable company and a little bit of a dabble in AI. But yeah, I think trying to figure out, for me, it just feels like a lot of effort trying to figure out who to invest in an area that I haven't been following very closely.
It's almost not worth your time. There's so many other things to invest in, so many things that excite you.
Yeah.
And if you find investing exciting, you're going to keep doing it. So it's like, don't get bogged down with being like, oh, but everyone's investing in AI and I should, but I don't understand it. And I'm going to have to set aside a whole weekend to read a book on it or something. Like it's like, oh, no, just put that aside.
Yeah. And I think the world is huge. And I think we can sometimes forget that in New Zealand, there's so many opportunities. And I think probably for me, something far more interesting than AI is we've seen in the last year with Taylor Swift and Beyonce and football and rugby, that women as an economic force is just so under-realized still. And
I thought you were about to say you can invest in Taylor Swift.
I would like to buy
like, sorry, what's the ETF?
It's a TAY. But I just feel like that to me is like anything that is making, I mean, how long ago was it, back to the menstrual cycle, of that we realized that women deserved our own like really nice menstrual products, and like we don't invest in women's health. We don't research women in science very much. Like there is for half the population, there is a huge amount of opportunity, and that's interesting to me. So I'd probably invest in stuff like that more.
Love that. I'd also be really keen, not now because we're about to run out of time, but to talk about some of those interesting companies that you've found and have, researched or think are interesting investment ideas, because I'm sure there's lots of people that would be really fascinated to, not get advice, but have some conversations about, I think we speak a lot about Tesla and NVIDIA and Microsoft. It's fun to like look at a different lens of investing and focus on a different element. Like Vic's looking at me like, fuck you, you act like you're really interested in those things, which I am. But it's more just, I think there are so many people that care about so many different things. And if there's someone that's passionate about investing in a particular space, like it sounds like you are, it would be amazing to get some of those
ideas. Amazing. Yeah, potential.
Ideas.
Yeah, that's right.
Advice.
Not recommendations, not advice, just some ideas that we stumbled across. Yeah. No, but thank you two so much for coming on the podcast. We really, really appreciate your thoughts and wisdom and time.
It was so fun.
So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
It was really fun. Also, just side note, great voices. Everyone was very good at, not talking over each other. Normally Vic and I get too excited when there's more than one other man. And then it comes to editing and we're like, oh God, we're annoying to listen to.
We're exactly the same. It's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah. Painful. It's painful. Yeah.
And if anyone wants to find out more about the work that you're doing, in workplaces, in the podcast space, where can they find you?
Powrsuit.com, POWRSUIT.com. Check us out. We've got all sorts of fantastic things happening, including a new community that's launching. So come join.
Cool. Powrsuit with no E.
Yeah, we're reinventing the power suit by removing the E.
I love wearing a suit.
Soph looks great in a jumpsuit.
Yeah.
I feel like she's taking the piss at this point.
No, very Farrah Fawcett vibes.
Someone the other day used that as a negative thing. They're like, God, my hair looks like Farrah Fawcett. I was like, everyone tells me I look like
You do.
It's actually a compliment.
Thanks. I actually take it as a compliment.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah.
Okay, bye guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to Raising the Curve. These conversations are designed to teach you everything that you need to know to be better with your money, from saving to investing to talking to your friends about your salaries.
And if you liked what you heard, we would love it if you could hit the subscribe button, please.
Yes,
or
please.
better yet, leave a review. It only
nice
takes 5
one.
seconds and it would really make our week, our year, our month.
Okay, lots of love. See you soon.
Bye.